The gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Flood, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing, which is on an incredibly important topic that I've been spending more time thinking about recently, and those are the barriers to housing development. Housing is an issue of incredible importance, and it's something we need to think really hard about in this committee because housing is always going to be the single largest expense and often the single largest asset for most American families. When we talk about inflation, rising prices, Americans falling behind on their debt, housing is a huge part of that story. I want to compliment Mr. Compton for his testimony today, and I really believe the way to get out of this housing shortage is to simply build more and build in more dense areas. One means of producing affordable homes in a quick manner would be to look at manufactured housing. Mr. Compton, can you speak to the challenges brought to bear by regulations on manufactured housing? And in particular, I'm curious on your thoughts as it relates to the Department of Energy conservation standards for manufactured housing and attempting to preempt what housing and urban development has historically been regulating.
Thank you, Congressman. I think that the issue between HUD and energy is a classic bureaucratic scenario. It is two different agencies who each wish to have their way on the issue, and I think that sight can be lost of ultimately what's trying to be done. One of the great challenges with respect to manufactured housing regulation is that the manufacturing process and other things move faster than the regulations can. And those internecine struggles on what you're going to decide slow it down even further. And I think that relooking at the regulatory process for manufactured housing at HUD and for that matter at Energy is crucial to having a more nimble approach that would do the sorts of things that, as one of your colleagues previously mentioned, to further enable the use of advanced techniques to lower construction costs.
I'll tell you, in my district, the 1st District of Nebraska, we have all these funds and state programs to build affordable homes, and they cost $400,000 by the time you build a stick-built home. And the folks that we're trying to help can't afford a $400,000 house. I want them in a house so they build equity, and maybe we start with a house that costs $175,000 and maybe doesn't have a garage. Figure out how they can live there for 5 or 10 years so that they can graduate into a nicer home instead of renting. And so I am a believer that we need to have one agency overseeing manufactured housing, and my money is on HUD. The second thing I want to ask Mr. Compton, you talked about some of these environmental reviews that go stale and it ends up putting the project backwards. Can you give me an example of something?
Yeah, for instance, Phase 1 environmental reports, which practically every real estate development, whether it has a federal dollar in it or a private dollar in it, will have a Phase 1 environmental report to assess the baseline of where that property is. Well, under guidance from EPA, introducing another agency into the mix, is that lenders and buyers can only reasonably rely upon a Phase 1 report for 6 months. Well, a city, for instance, may ask for an application, and as part of that application, ask for a Phase 1 report. Well, the city may take more than 6 months in order to process the application, and so all of a sudden, even if you get favorable results from the city, then when you go to your construction lender, guess what? You get to do another Phase 1 report all over again. And that's a very simple example. Unfortunately, in more complicated finance, that can happen time after time. And it's not just on the environmental side. You have other things such as market studies, appraisals. All of these have a shelf life. And it is a little bit like, I sometimes say, it's like cooking breakfast.
And you've done a great job in your testimony talking about some of the barriers. If you were sitting on this dais here and could wave a wand, what's the single best thing that Congress could do to help housing development and supply in the United States, understanding that state and local authorities are really on the front line? What's the number one thing we could do?
As I mentioned in my opening statement, I would remove passive activity loss limits from the Internal Revenue Code to enable private investors and small businesses to invest in residential real estate in their home markets, give them a financial incentive to go to the people who they elect, who they contribute money to locally, to help peel back some of the unreasonable regulations that impede the cost of housing.
Thank you, Mr. Compton. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman.